check, check, 2 2. Hey, hey, 2 2. I'll turn you up a little bit. It's pretty quiet right now. Yep. So
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. That's good. That's good. Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell them, hey, stop talking.
not, child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination. Though you may find from time to time complication. Bite your lip and take the trip. Though there may be wet road ahead and you cannot slip, just move on up for peace you'll find. Into the steeple of beautiful people where there's only one kind. So hush not, child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Move on up and keep on wishing. Remember your dream is your only scheme, so keep on pushing. Take nothing less than the supreme best. Do not obey rumors people say, but you can pass the test. Just move on up to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it. Just move on up. Move on up. We move on up. Watch out, we just move on up. We move on up. Move on up.
this on? Yes. So I think we're getting the last few people down the stairs and seated. And there's probably one or two still grabbing their last bar. But well, welcome back, and so glad to see how many people have hung in here for the whole day and have been part of all of our activities, because they really do tie together. And I know I was sitting there at the end of Raj's circle time thinking, oh, this is just a perfect setup from what we're going to hear this afternoon. So it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Mr. Tony Orange to the group for today's presentation. And Tony is a master facilitator with 25 years of experience supporting private and public organizations with dynamic and engaging customized training programs. He has conducted development experiences for key executives and production line employees throughout the United States, Europe, and Canada. Sessions that have drawn rave reviews. Participants in Tony's engaging programs describe powerful and exciting learning experiences that are safe and non-threatening. 5 years ago, Tony brought his background in social work and psychology to his work as a consultant with Brain Skills at Work. Brain Skills at Work applies insights from neuroscience to help organizations more effectively develop inclusive work environments and leadership competencies. In 2017, the co-founders of Brain Skills at Work, Mary Casey and Shannon Murphy Robinson, published Neuroscience of Inclusion, New Skills for New Times. Their book provides further access to the principles, strategies, and tools that Tony employs to help organizations create inclusive environments. I became aware of this work because I heard Shannon present on this topic at the Performance Excellence Network, and I got the book, and I thought this is a very intriguing set of things for us to think about. And then I called Shannon, and she was busy, and she said, let me introduce you to Tony. And I just knew right away. We were about 15 minutes into the conversation, and I said, this is going to be great. And I also found out that Tony has a connection to Metro State. His wife is a graduate. So please, so join me in welcoming Tony to the stage.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, it's a little loud. How's that? Yeah, I am so glad to be here. One is I get to sleep in my own bed, so I don't have to travel to Europe or Canada. So this is fun. I am very excited about this subject because I've been living with this subject all my life. I just didn't know what to call it, okay? And I live here in Minnetonka. I lived in North Minneapolis for 19 years, and I moved to Minnetonka. Been there for about 11 years. So yeah, I am home. But you know, originally I'm from Columbus, Ohio, born and raised. Anybody else from Columbus, Ohio? I always like to check that out. Oh, Dayton? Yeah. Anybody else? Have you heard of Columbus, Ohio? Yeah, that's where I'm from. And I started a long time ago, as I said previously, interacting with people around creating environments that's respectful for everyone. And neuroscience, as you heard from the President Arthur, you know, became a part of that process, and an easy part of that process. And so, I remember a long time ago, we used to sit in those circles. So I stuck my hand in the door in that presentation with Professor Raj, and I said, boy, this feels like home. You know, we used to sit in those circles and have those deep intellectual discussions. And back then, I had a brick fro, you know, because I was smoking back then. What I mean by smoking is I was looking good back then. I was looking good back then. And so, I have just given you a lot of imagery that your brain is processing just by me talking. Does that make sense? We are processing all the time. The brain never stops. It is scanning back and forth, trying to process. Do I like him? Am I just okay with him? Or is he getting on my last nerve? You know? And so the brain's doing all that stuff. You know, today, the reason I'm here is because here at Metro State, you are really committed to social justice and racial equality. It's true? Yeah, and what that's about is creating an environment that is inclusive, where everybody can show up and do their best work. But let me ask you this. What gets in the way of an inclusive environment? What are some of the challenges? Anybody? Unconscious bias. Yeah, that does get in the way, right? And especially because it's unconscious. And we're acting out of that unconsciousness. So we're going to talk about that today. Anybody else? What gets in the way? Yes? Institutional discrimination. Yes. Well, that was a mouthful. I like that. Yeah. And that does get in the way because there are things that are embedded into our culture, our society, our universities, our colleges, our whatever that's in there. And because of that, it gets in the way. Anything else that gets in the way? Your baggage. Yes. And I've got some baggage. How about you? Yeah, we all have it, don't we? We all have it. So, challenge that blocks inclusion is all those things that you just talked about. You know, all those things that you just talked about. But what we want to accomplish is, today and forever, create sustained behavior change. You know, sometimes we see a good book, sometimes we see a good movie, and we feel good, okay? And so we feel good for a while. But neuroscience shows us how we can sustain that change over a long period of time. And that's how you create environments that's respectful, okay? And who plays a role in that? Is our brain. You know, it's right there in the middle, making sure that we're doing things that keep us safe, because that's one of the primary roles of the brain 24/7 is trying to keep us safe, okay? It has good intentions. That good intentions are not enough. You know, we need more than good intentions. You know, we need a system. We need a process. We need to be accessing our frontal cortex. We're going to talk more about that and how that helps us. Brain works for us, and it works against us. Okay, and that's just fascinating to me. You know, I know sometimes. You know, well, let me say this. The very first time, I fly a lot, as you all heard. The very first time I was in an airplane, well, not the very first time, but one of the millions time I was in an airplane. You know, I've flown so much that I can do those things that they do at the beginning of a flight. You know, the person comes out and they do this, you know, and do this. I like when they do this, you know. And then the pilot comes on and tells you wonderful things about the plane that I don't understand, but I'm sitting there, and a lot of times I get bumped up to first class, so I'm in first class and not really paying attention, you know, and just listening. And then we start to take off, right? And the pilot talks, you know, and talks about some stuff. And I remember the very first time I was in a plane and the pilot started to talk. It was a female voice. Now, that was the first time I was ever in one of these big old airplanes, and I knew it was a female. Now, I was cool about it, you know. I didn't get up and run through the airplane, female pilot, or anything like that, you know. But my brain, it was something new. Now, we're going to talk about, you're not a bad person because we have these thoughts. It's just the way the brain works. Make sense? You know. And we landed. It was a great landing. Now, I didn't run out and get on the floor and kiss the ground or anything like that, but it was a great landing. But it taught me something about myself, that my brain is always operating and is trying to take care of me, and I have some deep stuff. And we're going to talk about that in this way. We're going to call it unconscious bias. How many people have bias? Raise your hand. Yeah, good. That was just a test. If you're a human being, you have bias, okay? Understand the brain dynamics and learn about how the brain can help us through this process. That's what we're going to talk about today, okay? So let's talk about the social brain. You know, the social brain, it wants to connect with other people, because that's one thing about us as human beings. As human beings, we want to connect. We are social beings. Matter of fact, if you lived in a cave by yourself, eventually you become psychotic, because we need that interaction. Now, some of us need a lot of people around us. Some of us only need one or two people. You know, right now I need a lot of people with me, because if just one or two people in this room, you know, it wouldn't be a fun presentation. So thank you for showing up, you know. But most of the time, you know, I only need a couple of people around me, but my brain needs that stimulation. Your brain needs that stimulation, you know. So it's just exciting how the brain works. The other thing about the brain is that, you know, we're always seeking out people who look like us. You know, there's some comfort in that, people who look like us. And the brain is always scanning that, okay, always scanning that. Now, I've heard people say, maybe you've heard this too. Raise your hand if you heard this. I don't pay attention to someone's race. I don't pay attention to someone's age. I don't pay attention to someone's gender. How many people have heard that? Yeah. You might not pay attention to, but your brain does. Because it's scanning to see, are you like me? Are you a friend or a foe? Make sense? Well, talk more about that. Okay? Neuroscience findings and inclusion, as you can see, our brains prefer people who look like us over people who don't. Our brains register differences as a threat, you know. And we're going to talk about what happens when your brain feels threatened. I'm just going to give you a highlight real quick, you know. We're just here together, right? So I can tell you what's coming up. That's that fight or flight syndrome. You ever heard of that? Fight, flight, or freeze, you know? And that's that brain that threat part of the brain being activated, and we'll talk about that. Both of these happen unconsciously in the brain, and it happens just like that. I can't even snap my fingers fast enough to illustrate how fast that happens, you know? And then it's that in-group thing and out-group thing. And if you feel like you're part of the in-group, you're moving towards that dynamic. If you're on the out-group, you're moving away from that dynamic. You know? And we've all experienced that, you know, that pull, push and pull, because of what's happening with people that we're interacting with. We need skills to manage that process. And we're going to talk about some skills. And how one might manage that. And one way that we have to make sure that we interact with our frontal cortex, because that's the part that helps us. We call that the executive thinking, you know, helps us through these processes. So we'll talk more about that. You know, there's two goals of the brain, two main goals that the brain really is very good at. Now, you see four things there. There's efficiency, problem solving, conscious thought, and speed. And they're all important, very important. But there's two things that the brain feeds off of. Anybody want to guess? Out of the four, well, let me just do this. Do a quick poll. How many people say efficiency? Raise your hand. Okay, look around the room. You'll see who's got their hand up. Okay. Problem solving. Look around the room, see who's got their hand up. Excellent. Conscious thought. Somebody saying this, but one person raised their hand, another person raised their hand. How about speed? Okay, you guys are so good. Two main goals of the brain is efficiency and speed. And the reason for that is the brain uses a lot of energy thinking. Have you ever been, you know, it feels like you started work and it's only been about a couple hours and you feel exhausted because your brain has used up all the energy? Now, there's ways to help that a little bit. You could take a nap, you know. But somebody comes by your office and look at you taking that might not be okay. But it's efficiency and speed, because the brain, it wants to use as less energy as possible. And so it creates these pathways, these maps. And it's almost like we're on automatic. You know, it's like we're on automatic. Let me give you an example how automatic this is. with a show of hands, how many people drive from work to home, home to work, pretty much on a regular basis? Yeah, yeah. Have you ever gotten home at the end of a day, you're in your car or your vehicle, and you're parked in front of your house, or you're in your driveway, and you're thinking, how did I get here? I don't remember. The brain got you there, and you can't rely on that by itself, but it will help you out. And so that's another way. And it leads itself into a lot of work that's done by Daniel Kahneman, and it talks about system thinking, thinking one, thinking two. And so in thinking two, as you can see, system one is fast, automatic, emotional, stereotypical. I mean, it's just, we feel like we're on automatic. And we're calculating things very quickly because it's helping us to move from here and there. And sometimes it surprises us. Have you ever been driving and somebody cuts you off, and then you sort of get close to the person, you look at them in the car, and it sort of surprises you who's driving it because that's not who you thought cut you off. The brain has already made up a story about that. That's how fast it does that. And then you have system two thinking. That's a slow down process. It takes more effort. It's logical, calculating, conscious, and it takes a lot of energy. It really does. It takes a lot of energy. So sometimes when you're in projects or you're doing some work where you really have to concentrate very hard, a lot of times we get tired faster. That's because the brain is using a lot of energy. Matter of fact, it uses about 25% of the energy in our whole body. The brain uses that. It can go up or down depending on how prepared you are in thinking about what you're doing. Sometimes you're only using 10, 20%, sometimes you're using 25%. It depends on the individual, but that's roughly what we're talking about. And so what's interesting is that we move so fast, and the brain helps us so much. Well, let me just give you an example how that works, okay? I don't know about you, but I like to play mind games. Anybody else like me? Yeah, thank you, my people out there. And so sometimes when I'm in one of these airports, I make up stuff about people. Anybody else do that? I'm not the only one, right? Yeah. People said, nah. Yeah. I might be seeing people walking by, and I said, oh, I wonder where he or she works, And I see somebody else, and I say, oh, that's not his real wife. Where'd that come from? So we're going to play a little game. You're at the airport, you're at the supermarket, you're at your people-watching place, wherever that's at. Maybe it's a park, or maybe wherever, your people-watching place. And you see this gentleman, okay? Okay? And just relax. Just go with it. See what comes up. I'm interested to see what this group says. Warm or cool? How many people say warm? Raise your hand. This is a warm person. Okay, look around the room, folks. See how many hands are up. Okay. How many people say it's a cool person? Cold person. Frigid person. We can go on and on. Okay. What is this person's favorite hobby? Yell it out. Golf, isn't that? It's so, yeah. I thought I was going to get something like skydiving, but I always get golf. A spreadsheet. Now, here's a question. Now, think about this. Do you trust this person? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? What's his involvement with Metro State University? He's a donor, board member. Yeah. And so, as you all know, that was our bias showing up. And for some of us, it wasn't an unconscious thought process. It was a very conscious thought process. But for most of the time, we just see somebody just like that, and all this stuff comes to mind, and that's impacting our unconscious bias. And the thing about bias is, and a lot of neuroscientists have said this, and you've probably said it yourself, our brains are a bias-making machine. That's what it does. And so a lot of times we like to say at Brain States Management is that it's not about being a bad person, a good person. It's about being a person. You know, we all have this. This is what we do. And part of the reason we do that is to keep ourselves safe. You know, that's what happens. The central function of the unconscious brain is to fill in the blanks when there is incomplete information in order to construct a useful picture of reality. See, the brain takes in so much information, but it can't process all of it because it's just too much. And so it takes shortcuts. And the shortcut was that exercise we just did. You know, we fill in the blank, and we do that. That's what we do, you know. How might this impact a student? You start Saturday, right? How might this impact your students? Yes? Yeah. He said, and your name? Mark. Mark says you need trust to develop a relationship with your students. Agree? How important are relationships? Yeah, very, very. And a lot of times we think that relationships takes a long time. It does. Relationships, a real, true, deep down relationship does take a long time. But what you can do is you can create these perfect moments. And we do it all the time. You know, we do it all the time. Because Mark, right, Mark? Yeah. I shook Mark. Hey, Mark, how you doing? Perfect moment. Perfect moment. Bernadette, what's going on? Perfect moment. Perfect moment. And we do this all the time. You know? And you start to pile those perfect moments up. And that's how you start to infuse an environment and create an environment where people feel like they're a part of what's going on. They feel included in the process. How much of this picture is accurate that we just talked about? I don't know. But it doesn't matter. We'll go with it until we meet them. That's what the brain does. Even if you recognize the value of changing behavior, your brain may not pursue it. You know, your frontal cortex says, you know, I really need to think about whatever I'm thinking about. And that's called epistemology. You probably heard that term before. It's how you think about what you think about. People nodding their heads. And so we all think about what we think about from our own perspective, and that's just an interesting conversation within itself. But it's part of the process of pursuing change within ourselves. And so, it's not always easy. Let me give you an example, okay? You see this wonderful thing right here we got. And so we're going to do this as a large group, and I need your help, folks. I need your help. So in unison, I'm going to count to 3, 1, 2, 3, and what I'm going to ask you to do in your very best voices is just to read the words on the screen. Now, in America, we read from left to right, correct? Yeah, so we're going to start with green, blue, red, brown, and then drop down to the next one, blue, black, brown, red. We're going to do it in unison, and it's going to be like a chorus of wonderful voices. Okay, you ready? You going to help me out? Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Green. All right, give yourself a hand. You just passed the test. Class is out. No, stay. We still got to get some more time. So, okay. Now, that's what you do. I mean, the brain is primed to do that. It's set up to do that. You practice this since you were yay big to learn how to read. And so we do that all the time, you know. But sometimes we get challenged from time to time. So this time, I'm going to count to 1, 2, 3. And this time, I want you to say the color. Don't read the word. Say the color. Okay? Now, my experience is it starts to get quiet in here. Okay? We want to keep the volume up. Ready? Okay. Say the color. Don't read the word. Okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay, stop, stop. I can't take it anymore. Yeah. People are arguing what the color looks like in the real. I get that. I'm like that too. So, good people, what happened? Okay, you've got an excuse. The rest of you, what happened? Yeah. So the brain had to work a little bit harder. You had to work a little bit harder. You were no longer in system 1. You were in system 2. You were using more brain energy. You had to slow down, some of you, and you had to think. Now, this isn't a thing that's going to give you a headache, but it could happen that you're in a situation where you're really thinking, and it can get ugly like this because we're not used to this. It's almost like somebody coming to school here at Metropolitan State, and they're from a neighborhood, or they're from an environment, they're from somewhere, but they're not used to coming here. So they're moving a little slow. They're not their normal self. You might even see them being lost out here, because they're using system 2. And how you interact with that person can help them get back online for their frontal cortex so they can start to feel comfortable about being here at Metro State. Does that make sense? Yeah. So dissonance is part of that process, you know? The brain prefers comfort over discomfort. So just in that little exercise, you had that push and pull about comfort. And we're always seeking comfort. You know, we like to be with people who are like us. You know? Have to consciously override to create sustained behavioral change. You know, you have to override that. You can't fall back into your comfort zone a lot of times. Let me give you an example. How many people celebrate Thanksgiving besides me? It's coming up, right? Right? And you know, a while back, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I'm looking around at my house, and everybody in the house is sitting on my couch, is eating my food, is watching the game. They all look like me. And so I was doing classes like this, and I was saying, people, you got to stretch yourself. You got to go out there and stretch yourself, and don't just rely on your comfort zone, because you know it's hard to change if we're comfortable all the time. There's no incentive to change. You know? So now, if you come over my house, and this was a conscious effort, you have people who look like people in this room at my house, sitting on my couch, eating my food. That was a conscious effort. Had to override that comfort. Okay? Build comfort in being uncomfortable. That's how you challenge your brain. You know, so interacting with people that you normally don't interact with. Now, I want you to be safe. Okay, be safe. I'm not talking about, you know, running out here, running down the middle of Lake Street and saying, "Hi, my name is Tony Orange. You want to come over for Thanksgiving?" You know, be safe. But once you create safety for yourself, then you can be able to reach out and interact with people and build comfort in being uncomfortable. Uncomfortableness is great for the brain. That's where you can start to build those new pathways. Use tools and strategies to increase comfort, such as making unfamiliar differences more familiar and comfortable. You know, just what I just said. So let's talk about the brain. There's a nice illustration. You can look it up in a dictionary. You pretty much see something like that. It's the Truman brain. You know, and so there's that reptilian part of the brain. And a lot of you heard that. That's where their fight or flight starts, right? And you know what's happening when that kicks in? Your body. There's a physical reaction to that. A lot of times, I'm being a little simplistic, but the blood from your extremities leave that part of your body, and it's protecting your core. And your perception that's like this starts to do like this. You know, have you ever been so mad at somebody but you couldn't even see straight? You heard that term before. That's what's going on, folks. There's a wonderful, I've got a partner who lives in Ireland, and he does a lot of this, and he was a fire fighter. And somebody was drowning in Ireland in real cold water. And so he dove into the water to save this person. And so his adrenaline was pumping. That's what happened in fight and flight, you know, it pumps that adrenaline. And so he was fighting in cold water and trying to save this person, and he was batting. He had to come up a couple of times and go back down, and he pulled the person out and saved that person. And he was just, you know, high on adrenaline, sitting to the side, and they were coming over talking to him. They said, you know, how you doing? And he could not speak because he had to use every ounce of energy that he didn't have enough energy to even speak. That's what happens in that fight or flight. You know, that was an extreme example. My wife and I, we were in San Diego for a family reunion. And we were in a place called Old Town in San Diego. Anybody been there? Sort of historical little place. It's cool. And it usually opens up at 9 o'clock. And so we would go there early because my wife is a coffee drinker. So we would get there about 8 o'clock in the morning. And we were there. I'm sitting outside. I'm drinking tea. I'm a tea guy. And she's drinking coffee. And she said, Tony, I said, she said, honey. She called me honey. Honey, I'm going to go use the bathroom. So it was about from here to that door. So she got up and was walking towards there. And I was looking, you know, as she was walking. And then a person, unfortunately, a homeless person, came out of nowhere and started screaming at her. And he said, I told you, B, don't look at me. The last time, and she had never met this person before, and he was just screaming. And my wife, and I was going, oh my God, I'm gonna have to get up and run at him, and he's gonna beat me up. It's gonna be embarrassing, you know. And so, but I'm looking, I'm starting to stand up to see. And as she turned around and started to walk away, and he walked the opposite way, okay? She was in that fight or flight mode to the point that she sat down, and she had, because adrenaline was running through her body so strong. And later on that day, we were sitting outside, she said, you know, I feel like there's mosquitoes out here. She had on shorts. No, there was not. It was that adrenaline was still in her system. And it felt like mosquitoes. That's what the body does, folks. That's what the body does. That's what that lower brain, the reptilian part of the brain impact. And then there's the limbic area, the region area, the emotional, positive, and negative emotions as part of that process. And a lot of times we get there, and sometimes we get stuck there. You know, we're not able to move from that piece. And then there's the neocortex. Some people call it the powerhouse of executive thought and reasoning. And that's what you want to get to. Now, you can't stay there all the time because we move up and down inside this brain from time to time. But when you get into that situation, and we're going to talk about it, how do you move to the frontal cortex so you can have access to that executive thinking? We'll talk about that. Okay, the higher brain, prefrontal cortex must be online in order to, here's the things you can do, access self-awareness, okay, engage in self-reflection. When you were over there with Professor Raj, that's where you were at most of the time, you know, engaging, reflecting, probably emotional too. Intentionally override unconscious habits and patterns. You know, you could intentionally do that, but you have to know about where you're at in that model. We're going to give you some examples. Manage discomfort and differences, you know. Appreciate others' needs and perspectives, even those we don't like or disagree with. See, we are our best selves when we are in that frontal cortex, you know. How many people, you come to work and you know you're in your best self? You know, you can deal with what you need to deal with. You're saying hi to folks. You feel very comfortable at work. You sit down, you cross your legs. You are your best self. You know. Manage bias, you know, towards differences. Because it's so easy to be comfortable and set in our ways. But your prefrontal cortex helps you do that, and that's, you know, helps you create inclusion. Create new sustainable behavior patterns. Create connections across differences and build trust. How important is trust? It is, isn't it? It is. And so, as you look at these, I see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think it's one more, 8. Manage complexity, ambiguity. Out of these, Which one is more challenging for you? That you know you have to be on your game to deal with this. How about self-awareness? Engage. Anybody that's a challenge for? Nobody in this room? Intentionally overriding unconscious habits and patterns. You got those unconscious, has that? Yeah. So hand. Manage discomfort and differences. Whoa, we got some hands up in there, and my hand is up for that too. Appreciate others' needs and perspective. Sometimes we can. Manage bias and intentionally move towards differences, where you're intentionally moving forward. Sometimes, yeah. Creatively manage complexity and ambiguity, yeah. And so these are the things that are challenging for us, but being in the frontal cortex will help us do that. Now, the defensive brain is very interesting, okay? And that's that flight and fight syndrome. And it was a very important part of our history, because this is the oldest part of our brain, is that fight or flight. So if we saw a saber-toothed tiger, it looked like a saber-toothed tiger, we saw a bear, we saw a snake, whatever, we didn't have time to think about it. Is that really a bear? No, we had to act, and that's why the brain was built that way. It would just kick off. And it hooked into our circuitry around fear, and that kicked it off. Now, we no longer have to worry about bears running the street. We don't have to worry about, saber-toothed lions, in our backyard for the most of us, But there's things out there that's called social threats, and these social threats are just as powerful as those animals back in the day. Now, there's safety. And what safety means is, am I valued? And think about being at work. Do I feel valued? Do people around me, do I know that I feel valued? Do they value me? It's not control. That's not being controlling everything, but am I in control of my sphere? What I can be controlled of, what I can manage. I want to be controlled of that. The brain likes that. The brain likes to be in control. It likes to be predictable. Certainty. I want to be certain about what I'm supposed to do here at work. So that the brain needs that. My status here at work. Do people think of me as being part of the team? Is this important? I like to have status at work. Fairness, and that speaks to not am I treating fairly, am I treating equitably? Is there equity out there? Is that part of this environment? Okay? So those are the things. Now, these things are just as powerful as a saber-toothed tiger. And what kicks them off is sometimes we're worried at work. We're dealing with deadlines. There's time constraints. Unexpected change. And these things can kick off the social threats. And these social threats is just as powerful, and they'll kick off that fight or flight syndrome. So, think about it. You're going to open up on Saturday, right? It's going to be a lot of stuff going on. And so, just know that these things can happen. And we're going to talk about what you might do about it. Here's a little short video that really talks about what one might do about how the brain is operating, how it impacts what we do at work, and I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to ask you some questions about it afterwards. So here we go.
Feeling included is a fundamental brain need. The brain reacts to this social threat just as strongly as if it were a physical threat, such as a snake, a tiger, or a bear. Take a moment to reflect on a time in your life when you were excluded. See that story unfold in your brain as the music plays. This may be a time you were excluded as a child in school, or it can be a time you weren't included in a professional environment, or even in a family setting. As you imagine that story unfold in your mind, notice how you feel physically in your body. What does it feel like? Where do you feel that threat response? We can intervene and develop skills and tools to notice when either the limbic or lower brain has been triggered and be in the higher brain more of the time. We call this brain states management. In the brain states management model, you will see how this connects to the triune brain, and you will see how each of the three main brain regions corresponds to certain brain states. Looking at the model, you see there are three axes. On the left-hand side is perception, along the bottom is choice, and along the diagonal is self-awareness. All three of these are dramatically impacted by what brain region is dominating in the moment. Starting on the left-hand side with perception. Perception can range from very open, where the brain can take in a really big field of possibilities, to very closed, where we're not seeing options and not seeing the big picture. Along the bottom is choice, which ranges from very unconscious choices to very conscious choices. Again, depending which brain region is dominating at the moment, directly impacts our ability to act from the higher brain and make a conscious choice. It is estimated that 50 to 60% of the decisions we make every day are unconscious. So this can be challenging when as leaders we're trying to make and sustain new inclusive behavior patterns. And when threats occur, our behaviors get more unconscious. Self-awareness is along the diagonal and ranges from low to high. Self-awareness is sometimes referred to as a mega competency for leaders because it is so central to leadership effectiveness. Our self-awareness will dramatically fluctuate depending on what brain region is dominating. It's a bit of a paradox because just when we need self-awareness the most is when we are in a lower brain reaction and we have the least amount of ability to access it. Let's look at how each brain state is impacted by these three dimensions of the brain states management model. In the higher brain state, we have the most open perception in terms of what the brain can see, the most availability of conscious choices, and the highest capacity for self-awareness and self-reflection. When we move into the limbic brain state, the brain starts losing perception, starts losing self-awareness, and starts losing the range of available choices. Let's take a look at the impact of perception in particular. When the threat response is triggered, this directly impacts our level of perception and our ability to see the big picture. As perception narrows and we see fewer options, we become more certain that the way we see is the only right way, and our confidence increases. When limbic or lower brain reactions get triggered with the threat response when we are communicating with others and perceptual narrowing kicks in, we lose the ability to see the world through the eyes of others and really listen beyond our already preconceived ideas and assumptions. Finally, the threat-stress brain state is the brain state where we have the least amount of self-awareness, open-minded perceptions, and available choices. As individuals, we all go in and out of these brain states throughout the day, and they all serve a purpose. Yet it is only when we are in the higher brain that we have full access to open perceptions, self-awareness, and conscious choices. We are going to build on these aspects of the higher brain next because we can become skillful as leaders in learning how to manage our brain state much more proactively. It is critical to learn how to manage and shift to the higher brain, which is why we will be focusing on two key skills: recognizing your brain state, shifting to the higher brain state. These two skills are very important because they help us to build new, more inclusive habits and behavior patterns in the brain, and through practice can actually help develop the prefrontal cortex further by staying in the higher brain more frequently. True or false? The adult brain is fixed at maturation and cannot be retrained. If you answered false, you are correct. This is called neuroplasticity, and it is now well established that the brain is malleable and changes physically in response to our thoughts, feelings, and actions. It is like plastic. If you answered true, That's because for centuries it was believed that the brain was fixed by early adulthood. I mean, how many of you have heard people say or even say to yourself, I am who I am. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's too late for me to change. Well, we now know that our brains continue to change and build new connections throughout our lives. In fact, rewiring the brain is how we grow, change, and bring about new mental, emotional, and behavioral habits.
How's that? Okay, do I need to repeat? Okay, I will repeat. Yeah, basically what I was, Basically what I was saying is we can build and strengthen our brain's capacity. I'm gonna give you a couple of nuggets around that, how one might do that. Around the 2 skills, recognizing the brain state and shifting to a higher brain, how you might do that. You know, when you are in that place of that fight or flight or your limbic area, that's a physical reaction. So let me ask anybody, when you're mad, I'm talking about angry, what happens to your body? What's happening to your body? What are you aware of? Can't talk. What was that? High blood pressure? Yeah. What, your mouth get dry. Yeah, what else? Muscle tension. Yeah. And so, that's a sign that you're in the lower part of your brain, okay? Now, you can do another physical thing to get out of it. So let me ask you, when you're upset, when you're mad as can be, what do you do physically to calm yourself down so you can listen to the other person? Breathe. And breathing is amazing. They've done studies, you know, how it opens up and you access the part because you're doing this when you're angry and the breathing opens that up. What else? What else do you do when you, what was that? Move. Yeah. Sometimes people say count to 10 or you move, you know, and you can do both at the same time. You know, President Arthur said, what about me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, hi, President. How you doing? Yeah. So you could do those things, you know, to calm yourself down. Another trick is put that person in appreciation. Put that person in appreciation. What do you appreciate about them? And for some folks, it's very easy, and for others, it might be more challenging. But when you do that, just by saying that, you are pushing yourself up into the frontal cortex. Okay. This is just such a fun subject. I can talk about this all day, but I've seen this play out in my life. My father, he passed away in 1993. He was 71 years old, you know. And my mom passed away a couple years ago. That's a different story. Both of them were outstanding parents. But my father, interesting story. He joined the Korean War. They're both from the South, but my father snuck into the Korean War. He was underage, him and his 2 buddies. They dropped out of school and joined, you know, the Korean War, joined the Army. And they did their time, 2 years, and then they, you know, honorable discharge at the end of that. And then my father went to work, and he worked in a steel plant in Alcoa, Tennessee. And Alcoa, Tennessee is about as big as this room, you know? But it's a wonderful place. And so he did piecework. Anybody know what piecework is? You get paid for the pieces that you produce, right? And so he worked there for about 18 months. Then he got laid off, him and his 2 buddies. They closed the plant. But then my father became part of a historical happening that was going on in our country at that time, in the late 40s, early 50s. he became part of the Great Migration. And what that was black folks leaving the South, going to the North to get jobs. And most of them was going to Detroit, because Detroit was the promised land, because they had the 3 automakers there. You know, and the 3 automakers at that time was who? Ford, GM, yeah, y'all got it. So he was headed there. Now, my father was different than I was. You know, I'm an introvert, I really am. My father was not. He was outgoing, very fun-loving human being. And so he was the lead person of any group he was a part of. And so they piled into the car, him and his 2 buddies, and they were going to the promised land. And the promised land was Detroit, Michigan. And so they were driving, you know. And so they would stop at any small town that had a smokestack. What that meant to them was that was a factory, you know. So my father would get out of the car, being the lead person of his group, and he would, back then you didn't go to the human resource person. It wasn't such a thing back then. He would go to the foreman, and he said, are you hiring? And the foreman said, sorry guys, we're not hiring you now. My father said, that's okay. He'd get back in the car, him and his 2 buddies, and they headed north to the promised land. They would stop at another small town. My father would get out, talk to the foreman. Are you hiring? Sorry guys, we're not hiring them. My father said, that's okay. He'd get back in the car. They keep going. Then finally they was driving through Columbus, Ohio. To be more specific, South Columbus, Ohio, on Parsons Avenue. And they stopped at Buckeye Steel Casting Company. Look it up. It's got a very interesting history. And so my father got out of the car, and he said, are you hiring? They said, yes, we are. Matter of fact, we'll hire the whole car. So my father and his 2 buddies got hired at Buckeye Steel Casting Company at the same time. And like I said, my father did that piecework. He was pounding that steel with his right arm. And he pounded for about 15 years, and then he blew out his right elbow, and it puffed all up, and he couldn't use it anymore. But that didn't stop him. He just switched arms and continued to pound with his left arm for another 15 years. And then he retired, and his 2 buddies retired with him, you know. And all that time, my father was thinking about his value, his worth. And now all that time, and he retired, and they threw a huge retirement party for him and his 2 buddies. And they had it on the plant floor in Buckeye Steel Casting Company. It was a long, narrow building. I mean, huge though, but long, narrow building. They built a platform similar to this, but was more of a rectangle, and they placed my father and his buddy and his other buddy on this platform, and everybody was celebrating them out there. And everybody was sitting at these big, huge round tables, about 14, 15 people sitting around these round tables. And they invited my mom, you know, his wife, and she dressed up in her Sunday best, and she said, Tony, you want to go with me? You know, I'm the oldest out of 4. I said, well, Mom, we're going to shoot somebody. She said, they got food. I said, okay, I'll go. And so we were sitting around these big round tables, and at our table was the president, the owner, and the CEO of Buckeye Steel Casting Company. And he knew my mom. He said, hey, Mrs. Orange, how you doing? And he looked at me, and he said, are you Orange's boy? I said, yeah. He said, I'm glad you're here. Your father was just great, and we were just eating. And the food, man, probably like the food you had for lunchtime. I mean, anything you wanted to drink. It was just fun, till Daddy took the 2-bird away, you know? So we just eating. And then in the middle of all this, the CEO, president, and owner of Buckeye Steel Casting Company, he stood up, he grabbed a glass, and he went, everybody got quiet. And he started talking about the gentleman on the stage. He started with my father's friend on the far left, and he told some anecdotes and told some jokes, and people were laughing and just having a good time, and they gave him a hand at the end. He went to the next gentleman, told some stuff about him, and he was laughing, having a good time, and everybody came, and he left my father last on purpose. And he said, Lot, my father's name was Lot, L-O-T-T. He said, Lot, thank you. And when he said thank you, my father smiled and teared up at the same time. My mom smiled and teared up at the same time. I mean, everybody was smiling and crying, and I was even smiling and crying, and gave him a hand. And they stayed for another 15 minutes. Then my father and his 2 buddies, they stood up. They started to walk out the plant, right down the middle. And people were coming out of the woodwork, just patting him on the back and say, way to go, LG. They called my father LG. You know, come over and have a drink, you know, and they was patting him on the back, and they were exiting out. And I watched that. And I watched as he walked, he started to straighten up and walking out of this plant for the very last time. He knew he mattered. You all matter. Each and every one of you. Don't let anybody tell you that you don't. You matter. I don't care what your position is. I don't care what your status is. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. You matter. Because you are the instrument that connects with the people who are coming in here on Saturday. To create an environment that's inclusive, it doesn't happen by itself. It happens because of you. And don't forget to treat each other with the same behaviors as you treat with the people that you serve. Got that off my chest nightly. So you all take care. And if you see me walking around, you say hello. Because if you don't, I know what that means because we talked about it. Okay? Any questions? Boy, I'm good. It's 2:30. Bye.